immense amount of gratitude for all of you on the call, for you, Lama Rod, for Bumi Sparsha, for Karen, for Alex, and the whole 9 yards. So we're here.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so appreciative for you, Rachel, and all your work to bring the work of the mother into more into the world, And I always call Tara the mother, my Tara. Um, just she's been such an incredible, I don't know, support for me,
Mm.
for a while now. For a while.
Mm.
I think
Mm.
Tara is the deity of the moment. But I guess any deity is the deity of the moment, but like, but right now Tara is the practice that we can take refuge in right now as we move into. I don't want to say that we're moving into chaos. We're moving actually into a rebirth, into a new kind of way of being. Um, and I wanted to. This just seems appropriate. There was a woman um, who just recently passed. Her name, let me see. Her name was Carrie Sealine, and she was a scholar of Judaic studies, feminist, religious, spiritual movements at the Graduate Theological Seminary. And she just passed from cancer recently. And we have a mutual friend, and she was so deeply involved in the divine feminine,
Uh,
in her research, coming from Judaic studies, coming from contemporary spiritual movements. And so she has this quote. She did this last video for her students and then her colleagues. And this is a quote from the video, which really speaks to what we're doing now. And these are her words from Carrie Sealine. Quote, that the days are becoming indistinguishable from each other is a sign of eternity. The new world isn't that of waiting for the old order to reopen or the old economy to restart. It's to realize that the messianic age begins when we see that the essential labor is to love and feed each other and to revel in the feeling of endless resurrection when we wake up and have nothing to do that we don't have to do unless we choose it and choose it in love.
oh, wow. That's beautiful.
You
That's
know,
really beautiful.
um, and that just reminds me of Tara, is
Yeah.
to wake up in the moment and to choose to love. That we don't have to wait for something to start. We can just choose right now to be in love, to
Well,
be of benefit. Hmm.
yeah, I want to say, I just appreciate your mentioning the chaos and then also saying, but there's something that's going to come out of that. And um, I feel like what Tara practice can do for us, and I think the practice does it because of her story, because of whatever our connections are to her, because of sort of the technology, even of the mantras and the praises, etc. But it really can take us into this very, very deep, still point inside ourselves around which the chaos can move.
Hmm.
But it doesn't have to pull us into it, or if we are pulled into it, we know we've got this place of refuge. We can come back to this mother.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I want to say something just about her story, but then you and I had talked about maybe we would talk about how
Uh-huh.
we got into it and why we think it's important.
Hmm.
But I'm thinking, like, the fact that there are 100 people on this call and there are more, didn't realize we had a limit of 100. So, oops. There were more people who wanted to come. And so that tells me that there's something about this story that is magnetizing people. I don't expect everyone on this call is a long-time Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. So I was listening to Ajahn Shanti give a teaching the other day, and he said this, and I quote, when the mystery of our own being meets a powerful story, that can elicit something extraordinary and transformative, where the creativity of the unconscious meets the story. And so in a few minutes, I want to say some stuff about Tara's story, but I just want to imagine that Tara and her story has somehow elicited and awakened something extraordinary and transformative in you all, in us, even if we don't understand it. And maybe at the end of a couple of years of doing this together, we'll understand it better. But anyway, so I just wanted to say that. And then as another way of welcoming, I guess, welcome to the story and to the transformation. But do you want to get started, Lionel Rod? Do you want to talk about how you came to Tara? And
Yeah, absolutely. I really came to Tara when I came into Dharma practice. I came into the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, and I started to practice with deities. Of course, my first deity that you're given often in my lineage is Chinrezi, or Avalokiteshvara, or other names. And Chinrezi is the Bodhisattva of love, and that was deeply beneficial for me. And then when I started practicing at the monastery that I would eventually train at, I was introduced to Tara and introduced to the full practices of Tara, particularly the 21 praises of Tara. And when I went into my 3-year retreat program, we would chant the 21 praises of Tara every morning, and that was really wonderful. That was really beautiful. But, in really orthodox, Tibetan chanting, it's like a race to see how quickly you can finish sometimes. So it's not like it's not like sitting and like absorbing the meaning. And of course we were chanting in another language, and I was reading actual Tibetan, not the transliteration. So you don't really get to sit with the text. You're just like, okay, I just need to get this over, because I want to have breakfast. And so I finished training, came back out into the world, and really wasn't practicing Tara. But in 2014, so I finished retreat in 2011. And in 2014 was the summer of Ferguson, of Michael Brown being killed in Ferguson, and the beginning of the movement for Black Lives. It was that summer that I really remember Tara calling back to me.
Wow.
I just kept thinking about Tara, and it was as if she was saying, come back and practice with me, because compassion is actually,
wow,
what you're missing right now.
Wow.
And that your contribution to this movement is going to be one of having people practice compassion and remember compassion. So I came back to the practice, and I began graduate studies in divinity school, began to study Tara. And that was really wonderful, again, being reconnected to the practice. And so after graduate school, I began practicing in another lineage called Kashi, which was founded by an American Jewish woman named Ma Jayasati Bhagavati. And it was a lineage, it was a Hindu Vedic lineage, but they were really dedicated to the teachings of the mother, of this universal consciousness of Shakti. And I didn't get a chance to meet Ma, but I am actually a close student of her spiritual daughter, Swami Jaya Devi, who I just got off the phone with, which is why I was like, couldn't get into the room. And she really introduced me, the lineage introduced me to what it meant to become a devotee to the mother, which for me, Tara, right, is an expression of the mother, of this universal consciousness that is really about love. It's really about holding. It's about transformation, And what Kashi gave me also was a direct experience. It wasn't about sitting and chanting and practicing texts, it was about sitting, following your breath into the heart of the mother, following the breath into the stillness, the
Mm.
silence, which is the very heart, the lap of the mother, and being held within that stillness. And I said, oh, that's Tara, right? That expansiveness, that openness, that space, that's the mother.
Yeah.
And so from there, I really began to teach Tara in a very different way. My teaching of Tara became more about experience.
Mm.
It was more about, okay, how can we get close to this essence, right? And how do we use our breath? How do we use our imaginations, right? And how do we trust our experience that if we turn our minds to the mother rises to take care of us?
Well, what I want to say is we talked about this with each other briefly the other day, and you also said that a teacher, Lama Palden, said you
Yes,
should think of Tara as your best girlfriend, which
yes.
I love that. Um, and so I think I want to say something about how I encountered Tara, which was a little bit strange, but therefore to me even more believable. And to avoid going back to the Big Bang to say where I connected to Tara, I just want to start at this one particular place, which was back in the late 80s. I got introduced to the Black Madonna, and it was like somebody had knocked my socks off. Unbelievable. And then through a long 10-day experience of Lakota rituals, I met someone who told me about this book called Longing for Darkness, Tara and the Black Madonna. That was the first I ever heard of Tara. Initially, I wasn't that interested in Tara. I was just like the Black Madonna, whatever, but that's how I got introduced to her. And then this whole thing developed about maybe I would go to Switzerland to train as a Jungian analyst. And I was in Germany, actually sitting in Darshan with Mother Mira. So that's my mother, who teaches in silence, which is phenomenal. Whatever arises when you're with her is what comes from you, which I really love. So I'm just sitting, I like to say, minding my own business in Darshan with Mother Mira in 1992. And I hear just reciting itself in my brain, Padmasambhava, all over and over and over. And I was with this really good friend of mine, Kelly Cross, who was my brother, in effect. And I went up to him afterwards. I said, Kelly, have you ever heard of anything called Padmasambhava? And he said, it's not a thing, Rachel. It's a person. And I know you bought Sogyal Rinpoche's book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And if you read the book, you'd know who Padmasambhava was. Okay. So then I started reading that book. But still, that was pretty wild. And I didn't get Padmasambhava. Yes, he's very connected to Tara, but still, anyway, I got it that I was connected to something through that experience. And then, fast forward about a year and a half, and I'm moving to Switzerland. I'm actually literally rolling up the rug in my living room, leaving my home, my family, my everything. And all of a sudden, I had a total panic attack. I'm not kidding, a breathless panic attack. And I had to stop rolling up the rug, and I sat down on the sofa. And just staring blindly ahead. And these lights started flashing. They would expand into green and contract into white, green and white. And honestly, I thought something was wrong with my eyes, like I'm having whatever. And I was sort of scared. And then I sort of settled down. And then in my brain, I said, green and white, green and white. What is green and white? And then the name Tara just literally appeared in my brain. And I still didn't know beans about Tara at that point. I knew this much. And when her name appeared in my mind, I started crying. I just started crying. And then I got up and finished rolling up the road. And then I went on to Switzerland. So it was through the telling of these stories, ultimately, to some people who introduced me to my teacher, Lodrö Tulku Rinpoche, and I told him the stories. And like a good Tibetan Tulku would say, he said, oh, well, clearly you have a past life connection to Tara and you need to do X. So that was really the beginning of the journey. And as people like to say, and it's really true, I never look back.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll say the reason I still do it now, and you'll see this in a few minutes. We're going to do pretty much a classic sadhana practice, which is what I'm leading us through. But it's a classic. Really, it's Indian, but it's what the Tibetans use. Structure that holds us with the refuge prayers, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the reason I keep doing the Tara practice is because it really does lead me into what you were just talking about, that subtle, still realm that gives me access to all kinds of things that doesn't have anything to do with my linear brain that wants to think all the time. So, yeah, it's a very subtle practice, even though it's structured. It just keeps reminding us of who we really are, which is that radiant essence that Tara is reflecting back to us. So that's how I got into it. And, you're speaking to why we need it now because of compassion. And I just want to say that I am shamelessly political, shamelessly. I started to wear a Biden Harris t-shirt. That could be too much. But I want to say, and you'll see this when we get into practice, it's an opportunity to call in all the beings you've ever been connected to in every realm. It's very inclusive. Tara doesn't care if you call in Jesus or Mary or Buddha or Muhammad or whatever, to call in all these holy beings. And I call this getting out the vote in the higher realms, that we need to ask for all the help we can possibly have. I mean, no matter how it turns out. But so I think we need the practice in so many different ways. And we can talk about that for the next 2 years. So, so I kind of would like to go into the story of Tara a little bit. But is there anything you want to add at this point before I do that? Or?
No. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about her story and my relationship to the story. And then please, if there's something you want to add to that, please do it. And I was talking to Karen earlier, our wonderful tech person, and Bokar Rinpoche was her one of her teachers. And he wrote this classic book about Tara. And this story that I'm going to tell you, although I'm going to embellish it, it's the Tibetan version of Tara. So Tara really emerged in India somewhere, it's hard to know. Seriously was emerging in the 6th to 8th century, but you can find her earlier than that. I think she got to Tibet maybe around 800, 900, 1,000, something like that. But this is the Tibetan story. So the Tibetan story goes that there was this woman, and her name was Princess Wisdom Moon, Yeshe Dawa, and that she was so devoted to this Buddha, whose name translates as drum sound, making all these offerings for the good of all beings, that I'm guessing that she was just radiant. And she just kept producing all these offerings. So these monks noticed that. And now you got to imagine, right, already at this point, she's not in the establishment. She's not a monk. So these monks come to her and they approach her and they basically say, hey, we've noticed you. We see what you're doing. We just feel like you're on the verge of enlightenment. And so they say to her, you should really transform yourself instantly into a man on the spot, or pray to be reborn as a man in your next lifetime and you'll become enlightened. And here I like to imagine this astonishing woman pausing. There's a pregnant pause. And first of all, she doesn't agree to transform herself into a man on the spot, which if you study the text, you will find that there are other stories where other women did do that, actually. And she's like, I'm not doing that because it's not the point, she's thinking. And then she gives them a little Dharma teaching, which is on emptiness, which is, emptiness is literally empty of any single thing. So gender is this completely empty concept. So how could it even be possible that only a man can become enlightened? And then she makes this extraordinary vow. I mean, put yourself back in the 8th century, put yourself back in patriarchy. You got a woman talking to a bunch of monks, and she makes this vow. I will only become enlightened in a woman's body. period. And then she proceeds to do great things for countless beings for many eons, and she becomes enlightened. She becomes the female Buddha. Okay. So I heard this story. That's in China Gallen's book, Longing for Darkness. And I have to say that when I first heard the story, I was like, whoa, yay. Here's this woman. She's standing up for herself, yada, yada. That was my first draw in. As time went on and my little feminist bones began to kind of rub up against each other, I'm like, what is it with this princess stuff? I'm like, I was really irritated by that. And at that point, I also didn't know that wisdom moon is a phenomenal name, which would be referring to the wisdom of emptiness. And moon is actually a symbol in many Buddhist traditions of enlightenment. I didn't know that at the time, that I was busy being irritated with this princess. And then, I mean, really, this didn't happen maybe 8 or 10 years ago when I was writing this book. It was like a light bulb went off, and I'm like, oh, right. As a Jungian who studied fairy tales, what you would think about is who's listening to this story and what are the code words? And princess would have been a code word for the Buddha. This is my thought. And that the people listening to that story way back then, the minute they heard the word princess, would have thought, I know how this story is going to end. It's going to end with a Buddha. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I kind of think it is. And I became far less irritated with this concept of the princess. And then, to be honest, when I would tell this story to the people who were studying with me, and I was just kind of, new at this stuff, even though I was already teaching, I would not say that line, transform yourself into a man on the spot. I thought, that's weird. Nobody's going to like that. I'm not saying that. Until I started reading about the shamanic roots of all these practices in southern India, Buddhist Tantra, Hindu Tantra, shamanism, goddess worship, all this is going on in early India. And then I started seeing all the shamanism in these practices, which we'll talk about as we go along. And then I thought, oh, yeah, right. Because a shaman, a powerful shaman, could shapeshift. An extremely powerful shaman could transform herself into a man on the spot. And I thought that's where that line comes from. And so then I began including it in the story and talking about, what I thought it meant. So I think the reason I wanted to tell the story, but also tell you the evolutionary process I went through with it, is that you will go through your own evolutionary process. And I think it is really like what Adyashanti talked about, when the essence, the mystery of our being meets a story that ignites something in us, then the possibility for transformation is just ongoing. And probably like me, you'll discover new things about it year after year after year after year. It's a wonderful, sacred story. And I will say that whenever I get ready to teach the story and I start going into it more deeply, without fail, and even right this minute, I just want to cry. I cannot believe this story arose in the psyche of humanity when it did, the super patriarchal time. It didn't do much good for women then. And it has remained in the cultures all over the world to this day. And here we are. And so that's mind blowing. So I don't ever want to take this story for granted. And I want to kind of encourage you all, to let it stay fresh and let it keep speaking to you, and and see what happens. So we're getting ready to do this sadhana practice. I'm not going to explain it ahead of time because it'll just take too much time. I'm going to explain it as we go. But I just want to know, Lama Rod, is there anything else you want to add before we sort of jump into that part?
Yeah, I I just want to emphasize, for me, I read the origin story of Tara, the piece, it's that moment where she says, you're stupid if you think I need to be anyone besides myself to get enlightened. And that's how, that's the empowerment that I take out of it for myself.
Wow.
You know, so like I can achieve enlightenment in this body. I don't have to be like you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that phrase spiritual autonomy,
Hmm.
which is profound.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what it represents. Thank you.
And I
Yeah.
think that's, and lastly, I'll just say this is I think that sometimes in our spiritual communities, not just Buddhist spiritual communities, but many spiritual communities across many traditions, like there's this pressure for it to conform,
Mm.
to have this like, I don't know, this kind of like this prescription, this scripted way of being that in many ways erases these really important vital parts of who we are. So
Yeah.
when we come into the spiritual community, we have to leave a piece of ourselves at the door, which for me feels very violent,
Mhm.
And I think this is what Tara, her origin story teaches us, is that we won't ever truly be free until we're able to embrace and include every single piece of who and what we are, you
I
know,
agree. Yeah.
even the pieces of us that like people don't like.
Or even pieces of us that we don't like, you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to say, one of the things that I love about the practice, and it's not precisely the way I taught it. I was taught it just the same with you.
Hmm.
But for me, it is extraordinary inclusive.
Yeah.
And you'll see that when we get to the refuge part, that nobody has to leave behind anything about the spiritual traditions or teachers or avatars or whatever that they came from, that they still love. They are happy to play together. So there's just no part of us that needs to be left out. Yeah. All right. Well, let's do it. Okay. Um, so I just would say now, take a moment, really just take a pause and just see how you're breathing. Don't change your breathing, but just see how you're breathing. Just notice how your breathing is. And really say a prayer of gratitude towards the breath, which supports us in every moment. And then in this pause, also, because Lama Rod and I have been doing a lot of talking, and I'm sure that you guys are having your own thoughts and responses. And that's all this forward outward movement. And so, what we're going to do now is have more of an inward settling movement. And I think it really helps there to pay attention to where you're seated and pay attention to all the parts of contact, the points of contact between you and the chair or the floor, to really purposefully feel that you're supported by whatever it is you're sitting on. You really don't have to hold yourself up. And just get clear about that. And if there are any places that are kind of contracted and holding on and tense, give them a little pat. Invite the breath to go there. They don't have to change either, but just kind of notice that. If you can let go a little bit, that's great. And then I would really invite you to let the image of space that is your most precious favorite image of space, whether it's the sky over the ocean, the starry sky over the mountains, the desert, the Hubble telescope pictures, whatever, when you feel into or can visualize this image of space, you begin to sense the spaciousness inside yourself. And as you do that, know that that spaciousness is an image and a reflection of your own awakened consciousness inside of you. We all have that, and it's that vast and open. So let yourself begin to connect with that aspect of yourself as you look at space, breathing in and out of space. And then because we know that space contains absolutely everything that ever was, is, or will be, now what we're going to do is imagine Tara arising out of space. This is green Tara, and if it helps you to look at the Tonka painting behind me, but I think many of you have that image. This incredibly beautiful female Buddha arising in a subtle body of green light. It's like a rainbow. You can really see a rainbow, but if you tried to put your hand on it, your hand would go through it. It's really there, but it's not solid. So she is appearing in this subtle body of radiant green light. It's an incredible expression of wisdom and compassion. Her hand, her left hand, is at her heart in the gesture of refuge. Her right hand is open in the gesture of supreme giving, which means she'll give you everything, including enlightenment. Her right foot is forward. She is ready to come the minute you think of her. And her left foot is in the meditation pose, which means that when she goes into action, she is leaving the space of this deep centered stillness. So just those 4 gestures are such powerful teachings. So when we look at her, even if we don't sit there and think, oh, this means that or that, which I encourage you not to do, just looking at those gestures can awaken some of this inside of ourselves. It goes right past the brain. It can just go straight into the interior. And so we see her here. She's with us. We've invited her to come. And then we are going to imagine that our teachers, our mentors, our guides, our guardians, really you can think of these beings from any tradition, and whether they're living on this plane or not at the moment, that because of those beings, you're actually at the point you are right this minute. They are part of how you've come to this very moment. To see them around, I kind of see them behind Tara, around Tara, but also around me. And Lama Rod likes to call them the circle of care, which I really love. And that we can feel our gratitude to them for everything they've given us. And we can also feel the love they have for us coming back to us. And so we really become aware of these beings with us. And then we can imagine that we're surrounded by our friends and loved ones and supporters. And you can think of some of them specifically. But then you imagine that they are surrounded by their friends and loved ones and supporters. And then they're surrounded by their loved ones and supporters. It just goes on and on and on. We're really inviting an infinite number of beings to participate in this practice with us. And then you can just take a moment to think about anyone you're worried about. And that could be a single individual, it could be a family, it could be the whole United States, it could be Syria, it could be anything. Anything, and anything about yourself that you're worried about. Just imagine you could put all that at Tara's feet, all of it. And that she's here with all of us. And so at this moment, we are going to take refuge. We're going to take refuge in Tara's awakened consciousness, this consciousness she embodies for us. We're going to take refuge in all the wisdom texts and teachings that have meant a lot to us, whether they're oral teachings or scriptural teachings or poetry teachings. We're going to just take refuge in all the teachings that have meant a lot to us. And then we're going to take refuge in the Sangha, which is the community. So we've created a community here tonight. We can take refuge in this community. We all belong to many others. But we can also take refuge in the communities of practitioners all the way back to the Buddha and beyond, the lineages and teachers, we can really take refuge in all the communities of practitioners that have ever been and that are right now. And then to also expand that out. And again, I like to credit Lama Rod for this because I really, really love it. And it was new to me until I heard it from him. Taking refuge in the earth and actually just in silence herself and in our own awakened consciousness. So we can take refuge in all of these things. And then we say the Bodhisattva prayer, which is, through the power of giving and the other perfections, I really want to wake up for myself and also to be of benefit to all living beings. And then we think the four immeasurables, and I'm just going to say them, and you can hear them and listen to them and feel them in your own heart. May all living beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all beings come to realize we cannot be separated from the sacred happiness which is sorrowless. And may we live in equanimity without too much attachment for those we hold close or too much aversion. For those we keep at a distance, that we could live believing in the equality of all that lives. And I want to say that this happiness that we're talking about here is just this amazing joy that comes when you realize your profound interdependence with all being. So we're really wishing that for everyone, that they could wake up to that amazing interdependence, that we're not alone ever. So that's what we're wishing for people. Om Sobhawa Shuddha Sara Dharma Sobhawa Shuddha. And so now we're really going to turn our focus to Tara. And we're going to imagine that her top three chakras are adorned with the syllables Om, I, Hum. So it's a white Om in her crown chakra, a red Ah in her throat chakra, and a blue Hum in her heart chakra. And you really don't have to worry about whether you can visualize those correctly. You can see them in English. You can just feel it as light. And we're going to imagine that now from her heart, this blue light begins to radiate out into the realms of the wisdom beings and the initiatory deities and invites them to come here. Ahehi Zamhum Bamho. And I love this part of the text. It says, because they've promised to come when we call them, they come and they're here. So we imagine all this energy filling up the room or wherever we are, all these Buddhas, the beings, their mandalas, the energy of Tara herself, just filling up our visualization and just making it vivid. All these amazing awakened beings have come. They've answered our call. And then we ask for purification. Om Sarva Tathagata Abhishit Samam. And here we imagine that some of the beings who have come are these white dakinis. They are like these powerful feminine energies that can be from one place to the next instantaneously, speaking of shape-shifting. And we imagine them appearing as white goddesses. Each one of them has a vase in her hand. And so when we ask for purification, what happens is this goddess begins to pour from that vase into our open crown chakra this phenomenal substance. It's like light, it's like liquid, it's both. It's like this nectar of liquid light. And I just invite you to see if you can sense your way into the actual feeling of this being poured into your body, your physical body, subtle body, emotional body, all the ways we exist. And as it's pouring through, if there's any like negative energy, any kind of stuck places where things have just caught hold from the past day, weeks, months, just imagine that this light is pouring through you. It's just pulling all that stuff out and just leaving your body through the lower doors, as they say. And just feel the relief of letting go of any kind of stuck places. And for the moment, just being filled with this light. And then we take this moment where we imagine that one of the dakinis is actually pouring this nectar into the open crown chakra of Tara. And this one drop overflows and it forms the Buddha Amitabha, whose name actually means infinite light, light without ceasing. So he appears just above her head in a subtle body of red light. He's really adding all his radiance to the practice and to us. And so here's a moment where I like to invite people to make offerings to Tara, but these are your personal offerings. So just imagine that you can actually offer her anything. If you're pissed off about something, or you're worried about something, or you did something you wish you hadn't, or you did something you're so glad you did, or you're so happy you finished this project, or you really hope you're going to be able to, XYZ, you can offer her everything. And she loves it. Man, there is nothing she cannot accept. And not only does she accept our offerings, but being the alchemist that she is, she can transform them. So you just imagine and actually think of some concrete things that you're offering her. She's taking absolutely everything that we offer her, everything. And she's transforming it into wisdom blessings. So we get some insight from whatever the thing was, good, bad, or indifferent. And just imagine now that she is pouring these blessings over you. They're coming to you from the transformation of your own life experience. And you might be able to pass this wisdom on after this call to the next person you meet. Om Benzamrita Kundali, Hana Hana Humpe, Om Sabhawa Shuddha Sardharma Sabhawa Shuddha. And so here's also really, I love this moment. This is a moment where we just take a little pause. We imagine this wrathful deity, Amrita Kundali, emanating from our heart. You can picture him any way you want to. He's blue and he's wrathful. And his job is to gobble up all the obstacles to our practice. He's sort of like the Pac-Man, if you're old enough to remember Pac-Man, of the practice. And you can just imagine you can throw any obstacle out there. The obstacle that says, this is nuts, what am I doing? Or I'm sleepy. Whatever the obstacle is, just throw it out there and imagine he just gobbles it up. And then he dissolves back into your heart chakra and he remains there as a protector. And then we just take one more moment to focus on emptiness again. And we imagine that we can hear the syllable Om resonating through space and matter, through all of space and matter. The syllable Om is vibrating. And then as it's doing that, I mean, really, literally, this is a syllable of enlightened consciousness vibrating through the whole universe. It creates these beautiful jeweled vessels. And inside these vessels is an Om. Each one has its separate Om. And then from those vessels begin to pour these amazing offering substances. And these are sort of the classic offering substances of music and flowers and water and incense and candles and so on. It's like a banquet that we're creating in our own psyche. We're just creating this incredible visual feast of offerings for Tara and all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So we see these substances pouring out clear, unhindered, and unending. Om Aham, Om Aham, Om Aham. Om Aryatara, Sapariwara, Argam, Pajam, Puspe, Dupe, Alake, Ganje, Navaje, Shabda, Pratise, Soha. So I put the praise in the chat box. I don't know if you all can see it. If you can see it, I know we're all muted, but read it if you can see it. So her praise is all gods and non-gods bow down, touching their crowns to your lotus feet. You remove all forms of poverty, both material and spiritual. I prostrate to the Mother Tara. So this is really just like saying all the varied beings really recognize Tara as their mother, as their guiding star, so to speak. It also gives you a hint that we're back there in those times where there were many gods and other kinds of beings and non-gods. So we'll talk about that as time goes on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to visualize something, and I'm going to tell you what that is. And then we're going to recite Tara's mantra, which is in the chat box. Om Tare Tutare Turi Soha, which really, her name means star, and Tutare means this supreme joy, same as the happiness of realizing everything is connected. And Ture is swift one. So the mantra is just really, actually, basically, the mantra is just saying, Tara, you need to come here right now, period. And you really mean it. So you're calling on her to come and to show up and to help us. So after I explain the visualization, we're going to chant the mantra 108 times. And I really encourage you to do it out loud so you can feel the vibration of it. And when we get to the end, excuse me, when we get to the end, we're going to rest in silence. I'm just going to see what comes to us through this process we've been through now, through this visualization, through the praise, and also through these mantras, which really contain her essential energy. So as we recite the mantra, it's really like verbally and vibrationally bringing the essence of her energy into our own body and into whatever our surroundings are, and actually into the larger world. So what we're going to do is just basically visualize Tara, and in her heart is a little lotus throne with a moon disc, and her seed syllable Tom. Again, you don't have to worry about seeing all this perfectly. Tom is like a large figure 5 with a little crescent moon above it. And that seed syllable stands for her. It also contains her essence. And it's surrounded by the mantra, kind of written in a clockwise direction. And rays of light are pouring out from the mantra, and that's collecting up all these blessings. The blessings come back and they're absorbed into the syllables, and then they go back in this light. So I think the key thing here is one thing I always want to say. It's like, do not worry ever about getting anything right. You know, the whole point is that we are calling on Tara, and we got a lot of time to learn more about this if it interests you. The main thing is here. We're really focusing on Tara by saying this mantra, and we're giving it a little additional push by visualizing this mantra circling in her heart and this light flowing out into the universe, bringing back blessings, going back out into the universe, bringing back blessings. It's like a little bit like that reciprocity between love and gratitude, you know? So however you see that, you know, see it and enjoy it. And if you're not a good visualizer, don't worry about it. You know, just really take it in. You know, we're together, which is fantastic. And we're with Tara, which is fantastic. And so let's just recite her mantra. And then, as I said, we'll rest in silence, and then I'll bring us out of the silence at the end. Om Tare Tutare Turi Soha. 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 Om Tari Tu Tari 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 Turi Soha. So take a moment and really focus again on Tara, on green Tara, here, really here with us. I mean, she's always with us, so it's like when we do this practice, it's really a reminder. We're calling her to be with us, but we're also calling on ourselves to recognize that she is with us. And in that way, she's appearing in front of us in this subtle body of green light. And she is this outer manifestation of an inner reality, that we have this also subtle body, this subtle light body. And by gazing at her and her gazing back at us, that part of us, all of us, can be seen. And we can see it ourselves. And so I invite you to also actually imagine, as you see Tara, like in this visualization with the syllable Tom and this beautiful lotus throne in her heart and the mantra circling around that syllable, imagine that in your own heart, that there's a lotus throne in your own heart with that same syllable, with that same mantra. And as you see this light pouring out into the universe from her, as you're seeing her very close to you, imagine it's also pouring out of your heart. And take a moment now, and I'm sure you've already been doing this, but just one more time, see who you want this light to go to. If there's someone you're really worried about, or someone who's sick, or like I said, a group of people, or all the people, the United States, the whole planet. But in this vivid, vivid way of all this light pouring out, just let yourself, both from your own heart and her heart, see where it's going. And imagine that by doing that, you're inviting people to partake in this love, to receive it and to partake in it and to be held by it. And that we're doing the same thing ourselves, because we really need it right now. And so now we're going to begin this process of dissolving this whole visualization to see all these beings that we've invited, all of them, dissolving back into light, going back to whatever realms they came from. We see Tara also dissolving into light. It's really like this mega explosion of light into the sky, into the whole universe. This light is just pouring out as these beings return to their realms, and we dissolve this visualization. And we can also imagine that light is pouring into us, and again, we're receiving it in the heart of Tara within ourselves, and it helps us really feel that she's there inside of us. And so then we're back where we started. We're back visualizing space. We're back with space, which is also Tara. It's the great mother that holds everything. And so now we dedicate the practice, and this really seals it and protects it and also sends its energy out. So we really ask that whatever healing, whatever positive potential, any kind of positive energy that's been generated by our doing this practice together, we dedicate it towards the healing and awakening of all beings everywhere, with absolutely no exceptions. And that includes us, no exceptions. And then we just have just a last moment of gratitude, thanking Tara and all the beings and each other and hundreds of years of practitioners who've kept this practice alive so we can do it today. So we have that moment of thanks. And then we just, gradually, open our eyes and, yeah. And I say, come back into the room, but it's not like you actually left it, So we have this wonderful tech host, Karen, here with us, and she has agreed to sort of monitor the chat box and see, I think we have some few moments we can have some questions. So if you want to put a question in the chat box, and I'll see if I can answer it. That'll also be interesting. But please, if you have a question, put it in there. And, as we're doing that, I also want to mention, and maybe Karen can put this in the chat box again too. I put in the box my teacher, Lodrö Tulku Rinpoche's, the website of his spiritual home and community. He has a cat just like that black one that's appearing on my screen in Julie's little frame. Anyway, I put his, I wanted to put his website in the chat box because he is actually doing an online retreat. There it is. The last week in January, which is an initiation into the practice of the 21 Taras. So it's a 4-day retreat, and you actually get initiated into each one of the 21 Taras separately. And it's in this tradition. It's the same one that's is in the book and that we're practicing here tonight. And he really said that everyone is welcome and that you can take it as a blessing. If you want to make a commitment to do the mantras or the praises, you can do that too, but you can also just take it as a blessing. And I just want to say that, this language gets used a lot, but I really do want to say it's an incredible opportunity. I don't remember him doing this particular initiation since we did it together in 1996. And he may have done it and I just don't know it, but it's virtual. Yeah, because we won't be able to travel to Switzerland and, everything. COVID is surging again in Switzerland again, but they are setting it up so that if you're not awake during the times that it's actually being offered, that you can get the recordings that same day. So you can take the retreat at the time. Yes, I have thought about the White Buffalo woman. I'll get back to that. You can still do the retreat during that same 4-day period. You can just plug into the recording if you can't do it live. And you can also go on his website and, there are people there that can answer your questions. But it's an incredible opportunity, I must say, to have that blessing. So I'm so glad that somebody asked me if I'd thought about how the White Buffalo woman and Tara are connected. That is like, if y'all know these old stories, these old African tales of Burr Rabbit, please don't throw me in the briar patch. Oh my God, I just would hate to talk about that. So I'm going to tell you a funny story, which is to graduate from the Young Institute, you have to take a religion exam. And I decided I wanted to take my religion exam on how all these things are connected. And I actually have, it's really a woman's pipe that I bought from a Lakota elder many years ago. I don't smoke it. I'm not a pipe carrier at all, but I have the pipe. So I went into this exam. I had a picture of Tara. I had a picture of Kali. I had the pipe. I had the Black Madonna. And I had this book about Inanna. And my premise of this exam was going to be these things are all connected. And the pipe represented the buffalo calf woman. So anyway, I put these all things down on this table and I started launching into this discussion. And this woman who was one of the examiners that I didn't know, the other one I did, I thought she was American for some reason. I don't know how that's gotten to my head. I thought she was. And she reached over to pick up the pipe and she said, "Can I pick it up?" And I said, "Oh," I started to say, "Oh, sure." And I thought, well, if she's American, she may know this. I said, "Well, yeah. And you're American, so you may already know." And she just stopped me in my tracks. And she said, "I am not American. I am Swiss. And I am an ethnologist. And you can't do this." And I said to myself in that moment, and I am fucked. So, anyway, the person I did know, Andreas Schweitzer, said, "Okay, Rachel, okay. So why don't you just pick one of these and talk about one of these? Why don't you talk about Inanna?" I said, "No, I'm going to talk about Tara." Anyway, it ended up okay. Not great, but okay. So I think for me, and the person who asked this question, it'd be fun to have a conversation with you about this. One of the connections that I make is that the buffalo calf woman appeared to the Lakota at a time of deep difficulty, and they were trying to figure out how to organize themselves. And she brought these central rituals to them, one of which was the pipe. And it's also a really interesting story because she's approached by a person who thinks that he can just, "Oh, this is a cool chick." And the other person who's approaching her is in complete awe of her and knows that this is like beyond anything he could ever imagine. So he's hanging back while the other guy sort of saunters up like he's going to proposition her or something. And she dissolves him into a pile of dust and bones on the spot. Anyway, so that, and we'll get to some of these wrathful Taras, but it is a story in a way of a woman's spiritual autonomy. You can only approach me in a certain way. And I'm sure there are more connections. Yeah, I'm sure there are more connections. But for me, yeah, there's a definite connection. So I see this question about Kuan Yin. I just learned this recently. I always thought that Kuan Yin and Tara were the same. It turns out that it's actually Kuan Yin and Avalokiteshvara. So when the story of Avalokiteshvara arises, which I think is really in the year 100, 200, like that, but then as this Buddhism spreads into China, Japan, et cetera, when it goes into China, Avalokiteshvara becomes Kuan Yin, becomes female. When it goes into Japan, he's Canon, which I think is also male. But there's a deep and profound connection between Kuan Yin and Tara and Avalokiteshvara. One of her other origin stories has to do with, and I think this is a story I'll tell another time. It's too good to give it short notice, but that he has this shattering experience and cries a lot. And then there's this beautiful lotus pond and this flower blooms and Tara blooms in the lotus. So that there's this idea that she appears to him in this moment where he is completely shattered. He's heartbroken by the amount of suffering that he experiences in this thing that we'll talk about another time. But I think that Kuan Yin, doesn't it actually mean she who hears the cries of the world, or she responds to the suffering of the world? So yeah, it's very, very connected. I don't know about getting the same benefit chanting in English. We're not Tibetan. That's what I think is very interesting. Is the same, like having done a lot of indigenous rituals, and I also participate a lot in Jewish rituals and Yeah. I often say that I'm glad to have lived I'll be 74 in December. And if you've lived that long, you can spend a lot of time in a lot of different traditions, and nobody can accuse you of being a dilettante anymore if you spent 30 or 40 years in each one of them together. So um, I love chanting Hebrew. It's more fun to me than saying it in English, but I would rather do this stuff in, other than the mantras themselves. I kind of like to do it in English because the meaning of it really resonates with me. But I'm sure that, people get a tremendous benefit from reciting it in Tibetan. And, the great mystery is, who are we anyway? And how are we connected to this? Like, who knows if we were Tibetans or Lakota or Jews or anything, or followers of Jesus? Of course, that would have made you a Jew in Palestine. But, who knows who we were? So I think the main thing is, to really notice what works for you. Really notice what works for you and follow that. I think it's so fun. Lama Rod is just such a fun guy in so many different ways. And I think the way he's changed the practices has been to suit himself. He's following his own inner guidance. So, I would just say, if you've got a thing in Tibetan and you want to chant it in Tibetan, do it. And if that feels different and good, do it. And if it doesn't, you like the English, do it. I don't think there's a more better. I'll say that. Yeah. Yeah, I think the mantras, I don't know about the rest of it. The mantras I can say for sure. They're transliterated from Sanskrit. And, Sanskrit, the language of Sanskrit was created only for religious purposes. It's not spoken anywhere. And so those Sanskrit syllables have been chanted for, in some instances, a couple of thousand years. And so I think in that case, like I wouldn't want to be trying to recite an English translation of this mantra, I do think it's nice to know what it means. And then I think letting go of all that and just, reciting it. So the next question is, I love this too. Sarah is saying she sees a lot of pink. And she says, of course, there are no pink taras. Anything to say about this? Well, I just remember many years ago when I first got into this, I had this super good friend and he had a daughter and he was very interested and curious about the taras. And I can't remember how old she was, 8 or 9. She said, isn't there a pink Tara? She wanted there to be a pink Tara. And another friend of mine has a little boy who actually, they were in a funky little gift store here in Raleigh. And there was a pink Buddha. He wanted the pink Buddha. So, I mean, if you guys, some of you I know are artists, you have to be. I'm such a klutz when it comes to art. But I say, if you see pink, I mean, isn't that kind of a heart thing? Like, paint it, have fun with it. Paint yourself a pink Tara. I think that's beautiful. And cultural appropriation. I've sort of lived with that question for a long time because I did study with Cherokee medicine man, really, and a number of Lakota elders. And I also studied with a white guy that Wallace Black Elk handpicked. And Wallace Black Elk was Black Elk's nephew, handpicked this white guy to do these Lakota teachings and rituals. I studied with him for a long time. And, there's a real big mix. That you see people in the tradition who get mad with people in the tradition if they teach people outside of it. And then you see other people who feel we've got to do this. And so this is all being brought to us by Tibetans. You know, we wouldn't have it. We wouldn't even have it, which is terrible, had the Chinese not busted into Tibet. And all these people fled for their lives. The Dalai Lama, my teacher, also left on the, you know, to save his own life. And he's just been teaching. He's 78. He's never going to quit teaching. And so, you know, and he's like, I like to think of it, he's right behind me. He's read the book, he's seen the cars, he's heard me talk about all this stuff. He's heard me get mad at him about feminist issues. I mean, all of it. And he's like, would you please just go do this? Please. You know, because what he really wants is for Tara to be in the world. And we're all Tara in some sense. And so we're going to be Tara in the way we're her. So I don't think this is cultural appropriation, because they're the ones who brought it to us, gave it to us, and said, go do it. You know, I can imagine that there's some very, very, very traditional teachers that would be alarmed at what I'm doing. They'd be alarmed at what Lama Rod's doing too. All I can say is it would be great to talk to them and see and feel and know what the worry is. And I can talk about my own worries, you know, because I'm not a geshe. I didn't go to school for 30 years. So yeah, but I don't really worry about cultural appropriation with this. I do like to be very careful to honor where it came from, which is why I like to talk about my teacher and, you know, to always mention, as I did in the book, where these things come from, you know. So, so somebody's saying there must be some manifestation that connects Tara and pink because rose quartz is connected with Kuan Yin. And that makes sense to me. It really does. I had never thought about it before. So she's saying, Maureen is saying, what do you think? And I'm like, well, I've never thought about it before. So I'll have to think about it some more. But yeah, rose quartz is an amazing stone for sure. Yeah, and Mary's saying, aren't the manifestations unlimited? And yes, that's true. They are. They're unlimited. And so, you know, this idea of the 21 praises, which is in all the lineages, actually, and it does come from India. Atisha came from India. This tradition that we're working with came from India. I don't really know the very first origins of the 21 Taras, but they've been around a long time. And they're a beautiful, as you'll see, it's a beautiful, it's almost like a literary device of having a way to focus on different aspects of what enlightened consciousness could look like in this situation, in that situation, when it's peaceful, when it's wrathful, when it's life increasing, you know, etc. So I think it's, I like to use the phrase a way in, which I get from a Jewish rabbi named Yael Levy, that these working with these 21 praises are a way in, but it's absolutely true. The manifestations of Tara are unlimited. So I think it may be getting time to sign off. Yeah, I'm so glad y'all are here. And, you know, we will be figuring out maybe what to do next time. So, you know, more than 100 people can come if we need to do that. A lot of people inquired about the recording, and you should see in that newsletter I wrote that you need to write to info@bhumisparsha.org, and they'll walk you through how to get access to the recordings. Yeah. And somebody's asking about the picture of Tara for my book. It's not on sale anyway. So this is it. This is the Tonka that picture comes from. And in the book, you'll see the name of the woman who painted it. She has a website, and I encourage you to go visit the website, but no, it's really not, it's not for sale. And yeah, I'm not sure if Karen put my website in the chat box, but I would be grateful if she did. And if anybody wants to make a donation, you can go to my website and do that. That would be great. I would appreciate it. It brings a little energy back. So anyway, I'm going to pop this in the gallery view just once to see everybody quickly. Yeah. I guess, you know, it's so funny. My group here at home would tell you this and they would laugh their heads off. But I always get to the end and then I want to say, and then one more thing. I think that's going to be the epitaph on my tombstone. And one more thing. I don't think I have to ask you guys to do this, but please, 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 in your practice, you know, dedicate everything you can to a clear outcome of this election for the benefit of all beings, and that there truly be minimal suffering around the election itself and afterwards. Yeah, I don't need to say any more about that, but these practices, I remember one Tibetan teacher, she's amazing. Somebody asked her, does it really do any good to do this dedication practice? Like, what are we doing anyway? And this woman said, she's the woman whose name's not coming to me, who sat in a cave for 12 years by herself. It's just, she's amazing. And she said, if you could see what the energy surrounding this planet looks like, it's worse than the pollution hanging over Los Angeles. And she said, when you do these practices and you dedicate the practice, you are like sending this energy into the field. You know, my beloved rabbi would say the God field, we're feeding the God field. And so please know that. Please know when you do the practice, when you dedicate the practice, when you offer, you know, yes, thank you. Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo. Thank you so much. Thank you. See, everybody, how many practitioners does it take to remember the name of one teacher? 100, apparently. So anyway, you know, give it all you got, guys. Pray like crazy. And yeah, and be well. And I hope I'll see you next month. Bye.
Thank you, Rachel.
No, thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Why doesn't everybody open their mic? And let's all just go one big thank you to each other, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys either. So let's do it. Let's sign off with one big thank you.
Thank you.
And blessings.
See you next month.
Okay. Bye.
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 So much. Thank you.